Hi everyone, it's Nicole here today for Mama Elephant with a partial die cutting card featuring the Wild Roar stamps and coordinating dies. Today I am taking a top fold card base, tipping it on its side, and using that coordinating die from the Wild Roar to do a partial die cut so that the scene really is the entire card. You just open up that front flap to reveal a little hidden space where you can write a handwritten sentiment. We're going to cut that big die out from the rest of them with some wire snips. And then I've got my card base tipped to its side so you can see the score line there to the left. And I did trace around the outer edge of my die. Originally I thought I might just cut this out and then place the die on there. And I opted not to do that because I think the die cut line is going to be much easier. So I'm going to kind of shift the die so that it butts up there in that bottom right corner. So it overhangs just a little bit and then overhangs the bottom of the card. Then I am going to take my die cutting machine and the cutting plates, and along the score line of the card, that's where we want to line up our cutting plates so that the die doesn't cut any further than that score line. That's going to ensure that it doesn't die cut the entire shape. And because we purposely left the bottom of the die lower than the card base itself, it's not going to cut that bottom line either. Let's go ahead and kind of remove our die. I did tape it in place with a little post-it tape to keep it in place. And then I'm going to take scissors and trim away that top part following the score line of the card. Then we can fold the card down and we have our card base. So we have this perfect die cut border that will hide any ink that we use. Now I'm going to use Zig Clean Color Real Brush markers today so they won't bleed through the cardstock, but if you're using an alcohol ink based marker like Copics that do bleed through, you're going to have that perfect white on the back because we're going to layer over another die cut piece. We're going to stamp and color the Wild Roar border, then die cut that and add it to the bottom part of our card, that little flap that opens up. I am stamping not only the border from the Wild Roar, but the two birds and then multiple leaves. I only stamped 3 here, but I'm going to stamp more and color those all in later. For cards like this, the coloring is definitely the most labor-intensive part of the design because there's just so much to color. One of my favorite things to use when coloring in any of these border stamps from Mama Elephant are the zigs because I feel like it's very quick and easy coloring. I'm using lots of different colors. I have linked to all of those in the supplies here on the video, so you can kind of catch all of those there. Lots and lots of neutrals. There are some pops of color in the design as far as the banana and the banana peel, the heart the panda's holding, a couple of green leaves, and then there's a little fish that the bear is holding, and then the toucan. He's got a little bit more color on him. Otherwise, I kind of kept to a more neutral color palette with lots of grays and browns and yellows. I'm going to skip around coloring a little bit. I tend to work left to right just to keep my hand out of the ink for the most part. I went ahead and colored the elephant really quickly because I knew what colors I wanted to use for him. Some of the other areas, maybe if I wasn't exactly sure, I would jump around just a little bit. But we're going to just keep adding color to all of these cute little critters. You could do these in lots of colors. You could definitely go for something a little bit more non-traditional and colorful if you want. The same technique that I'm doing here today with this flap, this partial die cutting flap card, consider any of the other border stamp sets from Mama Elephant. You could do this with any of those and for some really fun results. The giraffe is some light brown, and then flesh color. Surprisingly works really nice with that light brown. And then, of course, some pale pink for cheeks and insides of ears and things like that. Our koala is going to be some light gray, and then the blender is a fantastic tool for pulling out any color, lightening it, and getting great results as far as shading. Little pale pink for the cheeks and some green, light green and yellow green for the leaf that he's holding. Anywhere on these animals that is a dark black color. So let's say eyes, some of the noses, things like that, we will go back in later and take a black glaze pen and go over them so they really pop. That's any of the solid black images. If there is anything that I'm coloring in, so like the lion's nose, we're coloring that in. The lion, bears, just different animals, the tiger, we will go ahead and take glossy accents and add that on top so that it has a glossy raised finish. As we get more of the critters colored, you definitely start to see this fun border take shape. So much fun. I love these big, bold borders from Mama Elephant. I love that they keep adding to their collection of these because I think they're very unique and super, super fun. I like to keep cleaning the tips of my lighter markers off as I'm coloring. You'll notice I start with the darker color and then I blend that out with the lighter colors and clean the tip of my marker off so that I don't blend too much. We'll color in our little rhino. I also think it's really fun that we're seeing some different critters in this border than maybe we've seen before from Mama Elephant. So we've got a really nice little kind of zoo assortment of critters here. The rhinoceros horn, I added a little bit of my dark color and blended out with the blender pen so it was definitely a lot lighter than the rest of the animal. And then here's that color we're adding to the toucan with some bright yellow, a little green, and then everything else is going to be in shades of gray to imitate a black, and a little flesh color for the belly of the bird for a little bit of color. I did end up using quite a lot of markers here just because there is so much coloring. A lot of times I will try to keep my colors to a minimum just because it makes it a little easier when designing and all of that, but this is one of those where it's definitely fun to go a little bit extra and use anything that really helps tell your card story. I wanted to have a lot of different color combinations while still keeping it all, as I said, into the neutral color family. We're going to be doing lots of greens along the top edge of the card, so that's really where the rest of our color is going to come into in this design. And then of course the panda's holding a little red heart, so there's a nice little red pop of color there. Something that I love having on my cards is a little touch of red somewhere. We'll get our kangaroo here. This is brown and light brown. Blending that out with some flesh color. And then a little pale pink over the flesh color in the ears and a dark brown for the noses. We're getting close to getting to be at the end of this border. Now I was super anxious once I had all of this colored to see if my partial die cut border was going to work. I kind of knew it would just because the partial die cutting worked, but I wanted to see how that flap would flip and everything, and so I will go ahead and die cut this before I color in the rest of the images I'm using and adhere it to my card flap. We're going to add a little light grays and some dark grays to our zebra. Got our bear here, which we'll add some darker brown colors to. And then his little fish will color in with brown and light brown again. I like how some of those critters along the border in the front have something in their hands, whether it be the banana or a heart or leaves or the fish. I think that's super cute. And I like how the tiger is kind of almost holding its paws up over its mouth. I think that's funny. Looks like we have just a couple left. And then we can get this die cut and get to putting the rest of our card together. Color in some dark brown for the hooves, and again adding just a little bit pale pink here and there on some of the critters. Over some of the darker colors that's not going to show up, and so I won't use it on anything that it's super dark, like dark grays or the really dark browns. So now we've got our die. We will die cut this big border. Now this die does cut all the way around. That's why we slightly overhung the card base. So we will need to do a little trimming once we get this in place on our card. But let's take a look. I've laid out some sentiments there. That looks like it's going to work perfectly. I'm going to go ahead and add a little color to the inside of my card. I'm going to mask off the front flap with the Wild Roar Critter border. And then we're going to take some life-changing blender brushes and Lawn Fawn Freshly Cut Grass and Noble Fir inks and apply those inks to the top half and then just slightly lighten it into an ombre effect down the panel of our card. This is going to give a really fantastic effect of dark to light, and I wanted it to be green back behind and not white. I think it offsets the critters a lot nicer and gives the illusion kind of this jungle-ish type theme or whatever you want to call it. I started with the freshly cut grass first, and you can see even on a heavyweight card base how great these blending brushes do with regular dye inks. And then to shade in a little bit darker ink, we will use a little Noble Fir, especially along the edge to deepen and darken that a little bit. We will be covering up a lot of that top edge with the leaves from the Wild Roar stamp set as well. And this will kind of soften as the ink dries. These are dye inks that I'm using and applying here, so they will dry fairly quickly. I can remove my mask. I want to make sure and get any ink that might be on my work surface wiped up right away. And there is my fun border. Let's go ahead and get that attached to the card so we can start seeing this scene take shape. We're going to simply line it up with the die cut edge of the partial die cut flap. And then we can snip off anything that overhangs. And that's going to be a little along the bottom and along the sides. It's very, very minimal. And that cleans it up perfectly. Now I want to make sure that I leave enough room for the sentiments on this card. And to do that, I'm going to go ahead and stamp my sentiment that's going to be directly on the background where I want that to go, so that when I go ahead and attach the leaves to the top edge of the card, I make sure and place them high enough that they don't overlap my greeting. I'm using a combination of sentiments today. The sentiment strip that I am stamping on the background directly is from the Mama Elephant Sending Hugs stamp set, and it reads, "Just wanted you to know how wonderful you are." We're stamping this with white embossing or clear embossing ink and heat embossing with white embossing powder over that green inked background. I'm going to make sure that any little embossing flakes that might have migrated, I have out of the way, and then I want to heat set this, and I want to make sure the heat tool is really good and warm. You can see the card tried to start to buckle there, so I'm going to heat the back, heat the front, and try to flatten that out before the paper is all the way dry. And there is what that looks like. It's really starting to take shape now. Let's color in the leaves that we're using. We're just going to grab some of our green markers. I used a combination of light green, yellow green, and green Zig Clean Color Real Brush markers for all of the leaves. And then for our cute little birds, we're going to use an emerald green, a shadow green, and then some yellows to finish those off before adding a little pale pink to the cheeks. I think we'll come back and do the birds here in a minute. We'll go ahead and die cut some of these leaves. I wasn't exactly sure how many I was going to need. I just knew I wanted there to be a whole border along the top of the card. And I ended up stamping these multiple times and then adding lots of them so that it basically goes clear across the top of the card. As I mentioned earlier in the video, I always like to go back and add detail to the eyes and some noses of critters with a black glaze pen to really make their faces pop. I want to do this really quickly now so that that ink is drying while I work on stamping the rest of the images for the top of the card and coloring those in. It's not going to take very long to dry, but you do need to give it a few minutes to dry before you touch it, otherwise you'll smear the ink. And I'm also going to use this opportunity to take glossy accents and add it to the noses of some of the critters. And the beak, or not beak, pardon me, the horn on the rhinoceros. I decided to attach the leaves along the top edge of the card with foam adhesive for a little bit of dimension. Some of them are going to hang off the edge of the card, which is perfectly fine. We will trim that up and clean up the edge once we have all of our leaves in place. I'm using foam adhesive squares from Scrapbook Adhesives to attach these to my card. I also want two little birds to be floating up there above to break up all of the green in the background, even though these are a little bit of an aqua color as well. Once these are colored in, these birds are going to be attached to my card with foam adhesive as well. And then we'll take glossy accents to embellish the beaks. We're going to attach or adhere one of these right above the animals and then one closer to the leaves at the top of the card. Right about there should be good. And I could kind of see some of the foam adhesive square behind this particular bird, so I'm going to just pop that off carefully and fix that really quickly. And then don't forget the eyes on the birds as well. I always wait to do any of that embellishing until after I have die cut the images, because running it through the die cutting machine will often smash that gel pen and sometimes kind of ruins the look. For the rest of my sentiment, I'm going to stamp an occasional labels greeting on smooth white cardstock with the VersaFine ONYX black ink. I'm using the sentiment, "You're the best." So my sentiment's going to read, "You're the best, just wanted you to know how wonderful you are." I love mixing and matching different stamp sets to create one-of-a-kind cards. We're going to pop up the sentiment with a foam adhesive strip as well, right above the stamped and embossed greeting on the background of our card design. I want to center this right above our other greeting. And once we have those sentiments in place, it's really easy to take our additional leaves then and fill in the rest of the border at the top of the card. I wanted to make sure that the priority was the sentiment and that we're just kind of framing it up with all of our leaves. I'm filling in with lots of small leaves once I have the bigger ones in place. The small ones really add to the overall design of the card and fill in some nice little areas, adding interest. These were all colored with the darker green ink, while the larger leaves were colored with light green and yellow green. Once I have all of the leaves where I want them to go, I'm going to just flip over my card, take some scissors, and trim off anything that is overhanging to clean up those edges really nicely and make it so the card fits in an envelope perfectly. Here's a look at the card opening and closing. Thank you guys so much for joining me today for this partial die cut, the Wild Roar card. The supplies I used to create my card are listed and linked below the video here on YouTube. Here are a couple more videos featuring Mama Elephant stamps and dies that you might be interested in. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and be sure to subscribe to my channel. Thanks for joining me today, and we'll catch you next time.